Imagine refusing to join an HOA, and the very next day, two men in uniforms show up at your door. They claim to be law enforcement, demanding that you reconsider your decision. But something feels off. Their badges don't shine right in the light. Their cars don't have plates. And their threats sound more like intimidation than law. Most people would back down in fear, but not this homeowner. Because what those so-called enforcers didn't know was this: the HOA itself had no authority to be here. In fact, their very office, their supposed headquarters of power, was sitting on land that didn't even belong to them. This is the story of how one community's most aggressive HOA went from playing dirty games to being exposed in the most humiliating way possible. And it all began with one knock on the door. Chapter 1. The First Signs of Trouble. The neighborhood seemed quiet enough at first. Rows of freshly built homes lined the streets, all dressed up in the same shade of beige, with neatly trimmed lawns and shiny new mailboxes. On the surface, it looked like a postcard image of suburban life. But beneath that polished exterior, the HOA ruled with an iron fist. They weren't just enforcing guidelines about grass height or paint color. No, this HOA wanted absolute control. If you didn't join willingly, they had ways of making your life miserable. That's why, when the homeowner bought his property at the edge of the neighborhood, he made a simple choice: no HOA membership. His land technically sat just outside the governing boundaries, and he had no intention of handing over money or freedom to a group of self-appointed dictators. At first, the HOA tried the friendly route. Letters in the mailbox, invitations to voluntary meetings, reminders about how everyone in the community was a member. When that didn't work, the tone changed. The letters turned into warnings. The warnings turned into demands. And soon after, the threats began. It started small. Mysterious notices taped to his door, unsigned but with HOA letterhead, claiming he owed back dues. Then came the veiled messages about how non-members don't really belong in the community. But the homeowner wasn't intimidated. He had done his research, and he knew the truth. His deed made it clear. His property wasn't part of their jurisdiction. Their rules meant nothing here. Still, the HOA wasn't going to accept no for an answer. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, headlights flashed in his driveway. A car pulled up slowly, and two men stepped out. They wore dark uniforms, polished boots, belts with radios, even badges pinned to their chests. To anyone else, they looked like officers of the law. They walked right up to his door and knocked, firm and deliberate. When he answered, they introduced themselves as community enforcement officers and insisted that he was required to register with the HOA immediately. They spoke in rehearsed lines, warning him about fines, legal trouble, and escalation if he refused. But something wasn't right. Their uniforms weren't quite standard issue. Their badges didn't display any official county markings. And when he looked closely, their car wasn't a squad vehicle at all. It was an unmarked sedan with no license plates. That's when the realization hit him. These weren't real police. They were imposters, sent by the HOA to pressure him into submission. The encounter might have scared most people into compliance, but instead, it lit a fire. Because in that moment, he decided he wasn't just going to push back, he was going to uncover exactly how far this HOA was willing to go, and what he found, in the weeks that followed, would turn the tables in a way no one could have predicted, because their entire operation was built on a lie. The morning after the fake officers came to his door, the homeowner stood at his kitchen window, staring out across the neighborhood. The street looked calm, ordinary even. Joggers with headphones, kids on bikes, sprinklers hissing against manicured lawns. But beneath that quiet routine, he now knew something sinister was operating in plain sight. The HOA had crossed a line. They hadn't just sent letters. They hadn't just left notes. They had staged an entire performance, dressing up enforcers to look like cops, all to pressure him into submission. And if they were willing to go this far, what else were they hiding? He decided to dig deeper. The first step was research. Pulled out every document he had received since moving in. The original deed, the closing papers, and the HOA's letters. What he found was clear. His land wasn't included in the HOA's jurisdiction. The official maps from the county clerk's office drew a sharp boundary that stopped just before his property line. He was free, untouchable. Yet, the HOA acted as though he belonged to them anyway. Why? The more he studied, the stranger it became. He noticed something in the HOA's own paperwork. Their office building, a sleek, two-story brick structure with glass windows, and the bold letters, Community Association Headquarters, on the front, sat in a spot that didn't make sense. On the official plat map, the land underneath that office wasn't registered to the HOA. It was listed as private property. But whose property? Curiosity turned to suspicion. He went to the county recorder's office, requested land ownership, records, and traced parcel numbers back through the years. What he discovered made his stomach drop. The HOA's pride and joy, the place where they held their meetings, where they stored their records, where they planned their every move, was not theirs at all. The land had been sold decades ago, separated from the surrounding lots, and passed through a few quiet hands. And the most recent deed holder? Him, the very homeowner they were harassing. Through a quirk in county zoning and the way the neighborhood had expanded, his property included a thin stretch of land that extended beyond his home, land that nobody ever paid much attention to. It was just empty soil when he bought it. But somewhere along the way, the HOA had built their headquarters right on top of it, assuming it was theirs to use. And now they were running their entire empire on ground they didn't even own. For the first time, the balance of power shifted. The homeowner realized he had something they couldn't fight with fake cops, threats, or intimidation. The truth. Still, he didn't rush. He didn't storm their office waving documents in the air. He knew these kinds of people only understood one thing: control. And if he wanted to dismantle them, he had to play it smart. So he bided his time, watched them, collected proof. Every time a letter showed up, he saved it. Every time a community enforcer parked near his home, he wrote down the details. And all the while, he held on to the one piece of information that would turn their entire kingdom into sand. The land beneath their feet was his. But the HOA wasn't slowing down. If anything, their tactics were escalating. They believed their intimidation was working. Soon they would make a mistake so big, so public, that it would give him the perfect chance to strike back. The HOA didn't back down. If anything, their campaign against the homeowner grew more aggressive, almost desperate. It began with letters, thick, official-looking envelopes stamped with words like "final notice" and "immediate action required." Inside, they accused him of everything from unapproved exterior paint colors to having illegal structures on his land. The irony was bitter. None of their rules applied to him, and they knew it. Yet they bombarded him anyway, hoping to break his resolve. But letters weren't enough. Soon, vehicles began appearing outside his home. Black SUVs with tinted windows sat idling near his driveway late at night. Daytime inspectors strolled his property line with clipboards, muttering notes, taking photographs. None wore badges, none carried legal authority. But their message was clear. "We're watching you." Neighbors began whispering too. The HOA had been spreading rumors, claiming he was delinquent on dues, that he was being fined thousands, that he was in legal trouble with the association. People who once waved politely now looked away when he passed. They wanted to isolate him, to paint him as a pariah in his own community. But what the HOA didn't know was that every visit, every bogus letter, every so-called inspection was being documented. The homeowner had cameras, logs, and files stacked neatly in his office. He wasn't just enduring their harassment, he was building a case. Still, their most brazen move was yet to come. One afternoon, while he was trimming hedges in his yard, a pair of men in full security uniforms marched up the sidewalk. Their badges looked official, their belts heavy with radios and cuffs. But he knew better now. They weren't real police. They weren't deputies. They were another performance designed to scare him. This time, though, he didn't back down. Calmly, he set down his tools, pulled out his phone, and filmed the entire encounter. When they demanded access to his home for compliance inspection, he simply asked one question: which law gives you that authority? They froze, stammered, tried to bluff, but the camera didn't blink. Within seconds, they turned and left, the performance collapsing under the weight of evidence. It was a small victory, but it revealed something critical. The HOA wasn't just overreaching. They were panicking. They thought intimidation would silence him. Instead, it exposed how fragile their power really was, and he wasn't the only one starting to notice. That week, while at the county clerk's office for yet another records request, the homeowner struck up a conversation with a clerk who'd worked there for decades. When he explained his situation, the clerk leaned in and lowered his voice. "You're not the first. They've done this before. Pushed people out, built things they had no right to build. But if you've got proof that office is on your land..." The implication was clear. If this truth came out, it wouldn't just be a neighborhood spat. It could dismantle the entire HOA. That night, standing on his porch beneath the quiet suburban stars, the homeowner realized the balance had shifted. For weeks, they had been playing offense, and he had been on defense. But now he had the power to strike back. The question was when. He couldn't just walk into their office and announce, "Not yet." Timing was everything. The HOA had grown arrogant, and arrogance always leads to mistakes. He knew that if he waited, if he let them push just a little further, their next move would hand him the perfect opening, the moment he could reveal everything and leave them with no way out. And that moment was coming sooner than anyone expected. For weeks, the HOA had tightened its grip, convinced their tactics were working. But behind the scenes, the homeowner's case was airtight. He had deeds, surveys, time-stamped footage, and sworn statements from county officials. He wasn't just resisting harassment. He was preparing to turn the tables. And then, the HOA made the mistake he had been waiting for. It came in the form of a letter. This one stamped in bold red, marked mandatory appearance. It ordered him to attend an upcoming community meeting, accusing him of being in serious violation of HOA bylaws. The language was threatening. Failure to attend could result in further enforcement measures, including liens and forced removal. For anyone else, it might have been terrifying, but for him, it was the perfect trap. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed, rows of folding chairs filled with homeowners, many already restless from rising fees and arbitrary fines. At the front of the room sat the board, smug, confident, certain that they were about to publicly humiliate the man they'd branded a troublemaker. He walked in calmly, carrying a single folder. As he stepped to the front, whispers rippled through the room. Some neighbors eyed him with suspicion, others with quiet sympathy, but no one was prepared for what was about to unfold. The HOA president began the meeting with fire and fury, accusing him of non-compliance, threatening escalating penalties, even hinting at legal action. Their voices grew louder, harsher, a performance meant to show dominance. Then, the homeowner raised his hand. Silent at first, waiting for the room to quiet, and when it did, he opened the folder. Out came the certified land survey, complete with county seals and signatures. Then, the property deed, listing him as the sole owner of the very parcel the HOA office was built upon. Finally, he produced photographs, aerial shots, boundary markers, everything anyone would need to see the truth. The room went dead silent. Neighbors craned their necks, whispering. Board members froze, faces drained of color. The HOA president stammered, trying to wave it off, claiming it was irrelevant or outdated. But the documents were official, undeniable. And then came the bombshell. The homeowner held up a letter from the county clerk's office, a statement verifying the boundary lines. Not only was the HOA office sitting on his property, but technically, every meeting they had held inside it had been trespassing. Every dollar spent on maintaining it was tied to illegal use of private land. The crowd erupted. What had begun as a staged takedown of one man had transformed into the public unmasking of an entire organization. Homeowners shouted over one another, demanding answers, demanding refunds, demanding resignations. The HOA board tried to regain control, pounding gavels and calling for order. But it was too late. The illusion of authority was shattered. Their intimidation, their fake cops, their endless threats, all exposed in one devastating moment. The homeowner didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply closed the folder, tucked it under his arm, and walked out. Behind him, chaos consumed the room. The once untouchable HOA was unraveling, and everyone knew it. But for the homeowner, this wasn't the end. He knew the fallout would reach far beyond that meeting. Legal battles, media attention, and maybe even criminal charges were on the horizon, and he was ready for all of it. The days after the explosive HOA meeting were unlike anything the neighborhood had ever seen. For years, the board had ruled with intimidation and silence, neighbors too afraid or too weary to challenge them. But now, the entire community had witnessed the truth with their own eyes. The HOA's foundation wasn't power, but fraud. The first blow came quickly. Several board members resigned within a week, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew the truth. They were jumping ship before the fallout swallowed them whole. Next came the lawsuits. The homeowner, backed by irrefutable documents, filed for damages, not just for trespassing, but for years of harassment, threats, and fraudulent enforcement. His attorney didn't mince words. The HOA had knowingly operated out of an office illegally built on land they didn't own. That wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. The county got involved too. Once word spread, officials had no choice but to open an investigation. Inspectors confirmed the boundary lines. The HOA office, the very building where they had written fines and issued threats, stood squarely on private property. And then came the news cameras. Local reporters swarmed the neighborhood, eager for the story. HOA harasses homeowner, built office on his land. Headlines spread like wildfire. Clips of the chaotic meeting hit social media, gaining thousands of views. What had once been a quiet dispute between one man and a committee had become a full-blown scandal. The HOA scrambled to contain the damage. They issued statements, claimed misunderstandings, tried to paint themselves as victims of a technical error. But it didn't matter. The community no longer believed them. Neighbors who had once cowered under their rules now saw them for what they were. An empire built on arrogance and intimidation. For the homeowner, it was vindication. The fake cops, the threatening letters, the public shaming attempts, all of it had backfired spectacularly, but victory didn't come without scars. The stress of the battle had weighed on him and his family. Nights of restless sleep, days spent collecting evidence, endless whispers from neighbors who didn't yet know the truth. It had taken a toll. Still, as he walked past the now empty HOA office, soon to be boarded up and dismantled, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. The land was his again. The community, once divided, began to rebuild without the heavy hand of the board. Some neighbors even thanked him, admitting they had been too afraid to stand up before, but his fight gave them courage. A few even joked that maybe the new community center should bear his name, since the land it sat on had always been his, and as for the HOA itself, its days were numbered. With lawsuits piling up, investigations underway, and no trust left in the neighborhood, its authority crumbled. In the end, The homeowner didn't just reclaim his property. He reclaimed his dignity. Because sometimes the most powerful victories don't come from fighting louder or dirtier. They come from standing firm, holding the truth in your hands, and refusing to let intimidation rewrite reality. And for this, man, that was enough. The HOA had tried to erase his rights with fake cops and false authority, but when the truth came out, it erased them instead.